Audience, if you have a question and would like it considered, there are cards in the foyer that you can fill out your questions and provide them there. So questions may be specific, but should be respectful, not combative, and not intended to embarrass any candidate. And members of the debate organizing committee will screen the questions to select those that are the most appropriate. So we have a full schedule tonight. Hold your applause until the end of each debate. And I will pose either a topic determined by our organizing committee or from the audience suggestion. Now, there will be a little bit different format for the candidates that are running for the 6th Congressional District. We'll be spending about 15 minutes asking questions that have been provided by the committee and by citizens that have sent their questions to the committee or questions we receive here. So we will have one candidate to begin with and a little bit later the second candidate. As we get into the representative positions, each candidate will have 2 minutes to present a position on a topic that I will ask. Then each candidate will have 1 minute to rebut their opponent's position, followed by 1 minute to respond to that. So what we'll do is we'll start with the 6th Congressional District, and Derek Kilmer, Democrat running for the position, as you well know, currently held by Norm Dix, a resident of Mason County. And so what we will do here is go to my list of questions I have, Derek. And the very first question is, why in the world would anyone want the job in Congress at this time in our nation's history?
Yeah. Well, it's probably the most common question I get, and I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It's the first candidate forum that I've been to where I've been met by a marching band, which was kind of cool. You know, listen, there are 3 reasons that I'm running for Congress. First, I think there are too many people in our nation's capital that do not understand the challenges that middle-class families are going through. I understand the challenges folks are facing because I've lived them. I grew up in Port Angeles right around the time the timber industry was in decline. My folks were school teachers. My dad, in part because of the health challenges my mom has faced, is now in his 47th year of teaching. I've got a grandmother who's 102 years old, who depends on Medicare and Social Security to be able to live with dignity. I myself went to college with the help of financial aid. I couldn't have gone to college without it. And I've got 2 little girls who are going to depend on our public schools. So I think we need more folks in our nation's capital who are going to stand up for middle-class families. Second, I think we got to get people back to work. And that's something I know something about. I grew up in Port Angeles and saw a lot of folks lose their jobs with the decline in the timber industry. So went off to college and graduate school. I studied public policy with a focus on economic development, and then spent several years working in business. Came back and have worked in economic development professionally with the Economic Development Board for Tacoma-Pierce County. In that capacity, I meet with about 200 businesses a year with an eye towards helping them stay here and grow here. And I've used that experience in Olympia, working to help our small businesses, passing laws to reduce business taxes, to try to create a regulatory environment where they don't have to feel like they're shooting at a moving target, making sure we're actually addressing skills shortages, working to get a new hospital built just up the road in Gig Harbor that now employs 450 people. We've got to get people back to work, and that's one of the big reasons that I'm running. And then finally, we got to get people back to work, but we also have to get this Congress back to work. I think there has been too much partisan bickering and not enough progress. You know, I think the fact that you have either party defining success as making the other guys look like failures, you know, that is not a path forward. When I ran for the legislature, I did so with basically 2 ethics. One, on every bill that I sponsor, I at least try to get bipartisan co-sponsorship. Over 80% of the bills that I sponsor have a Republican co-sponsor because I think we're better off when we work together to solve problems. And we've done some big things in a bipartisan way. We did something they haven't done in our nation's capital in a long time. We balanced our budget. You know, we're addressing the state's debt in a bipartisan way, and I was one of the authors of a constitutional amendment that'll be on your ballot this November to try to reduce state debt. We passed a jobs bill that I was the main sponsor of in a bipartisan way. So that's been part of my ethic, and the other thing is I vote what I think is right. You know, I don't vote a party line. You know, I think there are Democrats with good ideas and some with bad ideas. There's Republicans with good ideas and some with bad ideas. My approach is this. We'll be a lot better off if folks vote for the good ideas and vote against the bad ideas. Doesn't sound like rocket science, but it's too often missing from our public discourse, and that's one of the main reasons I'm running. Got to get people back to work. We've got to get this Congress to be less dysfunctional and focus on moving our country forward.
Well, I'm going to follow up on the bipartisanship here because in my job I've seen that the Pacific Northwest congressional delegation, be it Republican, Democrat, whatever stripe, when it comes to Pacific Northwest issues that are important to this region, really band together and do a great job in a bipartisan fashion, either protecting or forwarding issues that are really important to us. Why do you think that is, and how do you think that that could be translated over working with other regions with their own ideas on things that they need?
Sure. I mean, if you look at, there are a number of issues, including protecting our military presence here in the state of Washington, whether it be the naval presence in Kitsap County or Joint Base Lewis-McChord in Pierce County. You know, we have a common interest as a state, and that's not a partisan issue. It's a public issue that we all need to have our oars in the water rowing in the same direction on. You know, whether it be, working to, one of the big things for our state and one of the areas where we are put at a disadvantage is on the crediting your sales tax against your federal income tax. That is something that in our state, Democrats and Republicans have consistently been willing to work together to solve for that because, in our state, we get a raw deal when we're not able to do that. And I believe, actually, that should be a permanent law to allow it, rather than doing it year on, year off. We should have a permanent ability to credit our sales tax against our federal income tax. That is middle-class tax relief, and it's something that I'm going to fight for. Here's the thing. I mean, right now I represent the 26th Legislative District, which goes from the Narrows Bridge to downtown Bremerton and all the way down the Key Peninsula to the Mason County line. I've knocked on 52,000 doors over the last 8 years. The vast majority of people I talk to actually do not care if we get more Democratic or more Republican or move more to the left or more to the right. They just want us to stop moving backward and start moving forward, and that's what I want too. And I think that is the ethic that we need in our Congress. We have got to get past the point where we're defining success as making the other guys look like failures. There is too much at stake. We've got a debt that needs solving. We need an economy where we need to get people back to work. We've got middle-class families getting squeezed. And I think the folks in D.C. are too busy fighting with each other rather than getting stuff done. That needs to change.
I think there's a naughty word that's been battled about, entitlements. And the thing of it is it's just a definition of things ranging all the way from retirement to Social Security to Medicare, Medicaid, and things like that. The Medicare, and the Social Security system, some folks say that it's broke. Some folks say that it needs to be reformed. Let's break those two out. Let's start with Social Security. What's your opinion on where we are with that? Yeah. And if it needs to get tweaked, what are some of the ideas that you would bring to the table?
Well, this is one of those areas that begs for a bipartisan effort to actually look at the long-term sustainability of Social Security. This is not a theoretical policy conversation for a lot of our families. It's certainly not for mine. I've got a grandmother who's 102 years old. Her husband, my grandfather, died 31 years ago. And her ability to live with dignity has been driven by the presence of Social Security. And that is, as I've been out on the campaign trail, that is so true for so many families. And so to me, we have to kind of depoliticize this conversation and get to the point where we're actually able to have a conversation around how to extend the solvency of Social Security. Now, one of the most important things that we can do to extend the solvency of Social Security is grow the economy. If you look at the actuarial studies, the biggest thing that's taken a dip, the biggest hit to our Social Security Trust Fund has been the fact that they're now presuming economic growth to be much slower than they had been. And if you put the rates of economic growth at kind of historic levels, it makes the solvency a lot better. Are there going to be tweaks to Social Security? I think there may be. To me, it's important. I've demonstrated at the state level the ability and the willingness to make tough decisions. What I don't want to do is make bad decisions. To me, it would be a bad decision, for example, to privatize the Social Security system. If you look at actuarial estimates, that would actually hurt the solvency of Social Security and not help it. You hear some conversations around jacking up the retirement age. Well, I think that's easy for a politician sitting in Washington, D.C. to suggest. It's a lot harder if you're someone who's working at the shipyard doing manual labor, or if you're working out in the woods doing manual labor. You know, working till you're 70 years old is pretty hard to do if you're doing tough work for a living. And so I want to make sure, while we may have to make some difficult decisions, I don't want us to make bad decisions that hurt our seniors.
Medicare, reform of that system as well. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not it should be fundamentally changed or find some way to take what we've got now and improve it. What are some of the ideas you might have in that regard?
Sure. Let me talk about what I think we ought to do and what we ought not do. And this has been an area of some disagreement between my opponent and me, and if he comes tonight, I'm sure you'll hear this. You know, his suggestion has been that we should embrace this notion of turning Medicare into a voucher program. And, you know, my concern with that is if you look at the analysis of that, what that would do is increase the cost to the average senior in our country by $6,000 a year. $6,000 a year. It ends the Medicare guarantee for our seniors, and I don't think that's the right approach. The good news is there are some things that there's some bipartisan agreement on doing. So, for example, if you embrace the approach to discounting of prescription drugs, just like we do within the Veterans Administration and within Medicaid, it's $112 billion of savings to Medicare over the next decade. I mean, that is something that we can do, and we already do within the VA. If you look at fraud reduction, you know, our state has just done this on the Medicaid front. For every $1 we invest in fraud reduction, we save $7. $1 of enforcement, $7 of savings. I mean, that's a smart investment. The big enchilada here, though, the biggest area of opportunity is looking at utilization within the Medicare system. How many of you have heard of McAllen, Texas? Any of you heard of McAllen, Texas? Okay, a few hands. So there was some attention given to this because McAllen, Texas has one of the highest utilization rates within our healthcare system. They do 3 times more heart surgeries. They do 3 times more spinal surgeries. And it's in part because we have a healthcare system that provides an incentive for doing procedures, not for keeping you well. Doctors don't get paid if you stay healthy. They get paid for doing procedures. And so in McAllen, Texas, they do a lot of procedures, and that costs a lot of money with no positive impact to healthcare outcomes. If you were, and in contrast, used as an example, there are some providers where you have really high outcomes to patients, very low utilization. The best example of that, the Mayo Clinic, okay? So if you were able to take those high utilization areas and just bring them down to the national average, you save about 30% within our Medicare system. I mean, that's big game hunting. You know, that's an opportunity for saving in a way that doesn't hurt our seniors and end the Medicare guarantee. And I think that's a much wiser approach. And you can do that through things like even just peer review. It's not something that has to be done on high from government. It's something that you can do through peer review and accountable care organizations, those types of things that encourage best practice, reduce utilization, save taxpayers money, and maintain the promise of Medicare for all of our seniors. I think that's the better approach than voucherizing it and adding cost to our seniors.
Let's get into deficits. To coin a phrase, it was once said that deficits don't matter. Well, actually, we find out they do. And as a matter of fact, the structural deficit seems to be coming one with the cyclical deficit. And we haven't passed a budget in Congress since 2009. So given that, what do you think can be done to actually get us to adopt a budget and stay within that budget without threatening things like sequestration or anything like that?
Well, this to me is a prime example of how broken our Congress is. I mean, the notion that we're even at this, precipice of what's called sequestration. I mean, there's basically 2 things that where we've got the gun at our own heads, and Congress may end up pulling the trigger. One is this thing called sequestration, which is basically across-the-board cuts in every area of government, including national security and things that would have real impact on our economy. And then at the same time, the other gun that they have at our heads is ending all tax relief, including for small businesses and for middle-class families. If this happens, which would happen at the end of this year, it is not an if, it is almost a certainty that we would go into another recession. And yet, Congress is, putting the gun at our heads, and potentially pulling the trigger. Now, I believe actually balancing the budget means something. I've been part of as Vice Chair of the Ways and Means Committee in our state Senate, I've actually been part of balancing the budget and doing it in a bipartisan way. I also think dealing with debt means something. I helped author a constitutional amendment that will be on our ballot this fall to reduce state debt. To me, and we did that in a bipartisan way. To me, that means something, and I hope to take that experience with me to Congress to try to deal with these issues in a bipartisan way. Now, there was something called the Simpson-Bowles Commission that looked in a bipartisan way at these debt issues, and it was valuable, I think, in two respects. One, it acknowledged that you can't do this in a political way. You actually have to work together to solve for this. The other thing that it suggested is you cannot tax your way out of this. You cannot cut your way out of this, and you cannot grow your way out of this. More likely, you need a balanced solution that relies on strategies to grow our economy, that looks at revenue, including some tax reform issues, and this has been some area of disagreement between my opponent and me. We both agree that the debt is a problem, but he suggests that we start the debt conversation by extending tax breaks, the Bush-era tax cuts, for everyone, including millionaires like himself. That puts us another $930 billion in the hole over the next 10 years. I don't think that's, if you're serious about dealing with the debt, I don't think that's the best way to start. I do think we need to extend tax relief for middle-class families and for small businesses, but I don't think his approach is the right one in that regard. And then finally, we've got to look at reductions and reforms in government. I don't think it makes sense in one breath to say we can't afford to continue the Medicare guaranteed to our seniors and that we need to voucherize Medicare and jack up costs by $6,000 a year, and then in the next breath say, but we can't afford to provide another $1 billion of tax breaks to wealthy people. So I believe that we need a balanced approach that relies on reductions, that looks at changes in our revenue system, particularly for those who are the most well off, and looks at strong strategies around growing our economy.
And at that, we're at our 15 minutes.
All right.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Let's give him a hand. So would Kathy and Dan